I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the faint hum of an air conditioner. For a second, I didn't know where I was. The last thing I remembered was standing beside a banquet table at the Indianapolis Marriott downtown. The annual Whitaker Logistics charity dinner was in full swing. One moment, I was talking to a customer from Louisville about freight rates. The next, the room tilted. Then everything went black. Now, I was lying on a narrow bed in the company's medical room. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead. My mouth felt dry. My head throbbed. I tried to sit up, but dizziness pushed me back against the pillow. That's when I heard voices. The door wasn't fully closed. There was a narrow gap. At first, I thought it was a nurse. Then I recognized the woman speaking. Rachel, Mark's executive assistant. "Are you sure she took it?" she whispered. I froze. Every muscle in my body tightened. A few seconds later, I heard my husband's voice. A voice I'd trusted for 16 years. "Relax." He actually laughed. A quiet laugh. The kind people use when they think they've already won. "By tomorrow morning, everything will be ours." For a moment, I wondered if I was still unconscious. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe the medication was making me hear things. Then Rachel spoke again. "What if she remembers something?" "She won't." Mark sounded completely calm. "Just stick to the plan." The plan. Those two words landed harder than anything else. Not an accident. Not concern. Not panic. A plan. I slowly reached toward the nightstand beside the bed. My phone was there. Whoever had brought me here must have placed it beside me. The screen lit up. 8:42 p.m. Only 27 minutes had passed since I'd collapsed. The voices continued outside. "I still can't believe this is actually happening," Rachel said. Mark chuckled again. "You'll believe it tomorrow." I didn't wait to hear more. My fingers moved across the screen. I opened my messages. Robert Gaines, my attorney. For 7 months, I'd been documenting things I couldn't quite explain. Missing funds, strange transfers, meetings that weren't on company calendars, late-night phone calls, excuses that didn't make sense. Every time I questioned Mark, he had an answer ready. Every single time. But my instincts kept telling me something was wrong. So I prepared quietly. Not because I wanted a divorce. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I needed answers. Now I had them. At least enough of them. I typed 5 words. "Execute the plan, now." Then I pressed send. The message disappeared. A few seconds later, 3 dots appeared. Robert was typing. Good. He was still awake. His response arrived almost immediately. Understood. Nothing more. Nothing less. Exactly the way we'd agreed. I locked the phone and placed it back on the table. Outside footsteps approached. I quickly closed my eyes. The door opened. I heard Mark enter. His expensive leather shoes clicked softly across the floor. A moment later, I felt his hand touch mine. "Diane!" His voice sounded gentle. Concerned. The perfect husband. I kept my breathing slow. "Steady." He squeezed my hand. The same hand he'd held when we bought our first house. The same hand he'd held at my mother's funeral. The same hand he'd apparently been willing to betray. "Diane, sweetheart." I forced my eyes open. Slowly. Like someone waking naturally. Relief immediately appeared on his face. Or at least a performance of relief. "Thank God." He leaned forward. "You scared me." I looked at him. Really looked at him. His navy suit. His wedding ring. The tiny crease beside his eye. The familiar face I'd loved for nearly 2 decades. Nothing looked different. Yet everything had changed. "What happened?" I asked. The question came out weak. Convincing. "I think you fainted." He smiled softly. "The doctors think it was exhaustion." Doctors. Plural. Interesting. I'd only seen a company nurse. "You've been working too hard," he continued. "You need to slow down." I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded. My acting wasn't nearly as polished as his. But it would have to do. "Rachel was worried sick," he added. That nearly made me choke. Rachel. Worried. Right. A few minutes later, the nurse entered. Her badge read, Karen Sullivan. She checked my blood pressure. Asked a few routine questions. Everything appeared normal. Mark stayed beside me the entire time. The attentive husband. The devoted partner. The concerned caregiver. Anybody walking into that room would have admired him. Eventually, Karen left. Mark checked his watch. I should go make sure everything at the event wraps up. I nodded. Okay. He kissed my forehead. I love you. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because I believe them, because I used to. After he left, I sat alone. The room felt strangely quiet. I stared at the wall for several minutes. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to storm downstairs and confront them both. But anger is expensive. It makes people careless. And I couldn't afford careless. Not yet. Around 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. A text from Robert. I opened it. Call me when you're alone. I immediately pressed dial. He answered before the first ring finished. Diane. His voice was low. Urgent. You were right. A chill ran through me. What did you find? More than I expected. He paused. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. The money transfers weren't the real problem. What do you mean? Another pause. Diane, I think somebody wanted you out of the way. The room suddenly felt much colder. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I swallowed. What do we do now? His answer came instantly. We proceed exactly as planned. Outside the medical room window, the Indianapolis skyline glowed against the dark night. Somewhere downtown, traffic moved along Interstate 65. People were heading home, eating late dinners, watching television, living normal lives. Mine had just changed forever. And tomorrow morning, one of us was going to lose everything. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed. For a few seconds, I almost convinced myself the previous night had never happened. The familiar ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. Sunlight filtered through the plantation shutters. I could hear a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Normal sounds. Normal morning. Then I remembered Rachel's voice. Are you sure she took it? And Mark's answer. Everything rushed back. I sat up slowly. My head still felt heavy, though not nearly as bad as the night before. A glance at the clock showed 7:14 a.m. My phone was already sitting on the nightstand. 3 missed calls. 2 emails from Robert. 1 text. We need to talk today. Before I could open it, the bedroom door swung open. Mark walked in carrying a tray. Coffee. Toast. Fresh fruit. The whole picture-perfect husband routine. Morning, beautiful. He smiled. The same smile that had convinced me to marry him 16 years ago. The same smile that now made me wonder how long he'd been lying. You should be resting. He set the tray down beside me. I made breakfast. I looked at the toast. Sourdough. My favorite. The irony almost made me laugh. Thanks. You feeling okay? A little tired. He nodded sympathetically. That's understandable. Then he sat beside me. You've been carrying too much responsibility lately. There it was again. The exhaustion narrative. The explanation they wanted everyone to believe. I sipped my coffee. Carefully. Very carefully. Maybe. You don't have to prove anything anymore, Diane. His voice sounded comforting. Almost persuasive. We've built a great life. That word bothered me now. Because the truth was far more complicated. The life we'd built hadn't happened equally. Not even close. Years ago, when we first met, Mark was charming, funny, and ambitious. He had ideas. Lots of ideas. Most of them failed. There was the landscaping company. Then the restaurant investment. Then a sporting goods startup. Then another venture I can barely remember. Every time something collapsed, we'd start over. Meanwhile, I worked. And worked. And worked. At 30, I was taking MBA classes at night after full days at the office. At 32, I was managing regional logistics contracts. At 35, I became CFO. Our savings grew because I made sure they grew. Our investments succeeded because I researched every decision. The company prospered because I spent years helping modernize operations. I never minded. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Or at least that's what I believed. Now I wasn't sure what Mark believed. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. Just for a second. But I noticed. And so did he. Work stuff. Of course. He stood. I should get going. Then he leaned over and kissed my forehead. Again. Always the forehead. Always careful. Always controlled. I love you. I smiled. I love you too. The words tasted strange. The second he left, I walked to the window. His black BMW pulled out of the driveway. The moment it disappeared, I grabbed my phone. Robert answered immediately. How are you feeling? Angry. He laughed softly. Good. Anger keeps people awake. Did you find anything else? Quite a bit. I sat down at the kitchen table. Outside, a neighbor walked her golden retriever. Across the street, somebody was putting trash bins out. The ordinary rhythm of suburban Carmel, Indiana. Meanwhile, my life was quietly exploding. Robert continued. The financial transfers are much bigger than we thought. How much bigger? Over 800,000. I nearly dropped the phone. What? I know. How? We're still tracing everything. I stared at the hardwood floor. $800,000. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't poor bookkeeping. That was theft. Where did it go? Several shell companies. My stomach tightened. Who owns them? That's where it gets interesting. I already knew the answer. Still, I asked. Who? Rachel and Mark. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Partly because I was furious. Partly because hearing it confirmed felt different than suspecting it. Suspicion leaves room for hope. Facts don't. After we hung up, I spent most of the afternoon pretending life was normal. I answered emails, returned calls, reviewed reports. At least that's what I told everyone. In reality, I reread every text Robert sent. Every detail. Every timeline. Every transaction. By 3 o'clock, another surprise arrived. This one almost made me laugh. My phone buzzed. A text from Mark. Or at least it was supposed to be. The message read, "Miss you already. Last night was worth the wait." A heart emoji followed. Then another. I stared at the screen. For a full 10 seconds. Then another message arrived. "Sorry, wrong person." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. A minute later, Mark called. "Diane." His voice sounded nervous. Rare for him. "I got your text. That was meant for a client." A client? Yeah. One that gets heart emojis. Silence. Then he chuckled awkwardly. "You know how people text these days?" "Sure. Of course." I decided to help him. "Don't worry about it." The relief in his voice was immediate. "Thanks, honey." Honey. That word almost made me throw the phone. After hanging up, I sat back in my office chair. For years, I had worried I might be imagining things. Now I knew better. The lies weren't even clever anymore. They were simply piling up. At 6 that evening, Robert called again. His voice sounded different, sharper, more focused. "Diane, are you alone?" "Yes." I just got the lab report. My pulse quickened. "The report from last night?" "Yes." I stood up. Every instinct in my body suddenly felt alert. "What does it say?" A brief silence. Then Robert answered, "The substance in your system shouldn't have been there." I gripped the edge of my desk. What substance? They found traces of a sedative. The room went completely still. Outside my office window, the sky was turning orange with sunset. Cars moved through traffic. People headed home. Life continued. But I barely noticed. Because one fact kept repeating in my head. I hadn't accidentally collapsed. Someone had helped make it happen. And suddenly, the affair seemed like the smallest betrayal of all. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same thing. Mark standing beside my hospital bed, holding my hand, telling me he loved me. Hours after I'd heard him discussing a plan with Rachel. Around 3 a.m., I finally gave up on sleep. I went downstairs, made a cup of chamomile tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. The grandfather clock in the dining room ticked steadily. The same clock my father had given me years ago. For some reason, I found myself staring at it, thinking about him. My father had died 8 years earlier. A heart attack. Completely unexpected. He'd been the one who taught me how to read financial statements before I was old enough to drive. He used to joke that numbers never lied. People did. At the time, I thought he was cynical. Now I understood exactly what he meant. My phone rang at 7:12 the next morning. "Robert." I answered immediately. "You found something?" "I did." His voice sounded different. Not worried. Excited. "Where are you?" "Home." "Good. Stay there." That got my attention. "What happened?" "I'll be there in 45 minutes. Then he hung up. 40 minutes later, Robert pulled into my driveway. I met him in the kitchen. He carried a thick folder. The kind lawyers bring when they're about to change your life. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please." 5 minutes later, we sat across from each other. Robert opened the folder. Then he smiled. Not a happy smile. More like the smile of a man who had just solved a puzzle. Diane, I have good news. I could use some. He slid several documents across the table. I looked at them. Trust agreements, corporate ownership records, old legal filings. At first, none of it made sense. Then I saw my father's signature. My heart skipped. What is this? Robert leaned back. Your father. What about him? He was smarter than all of us. I stared at him. What are you talking about? Robert tapped one page. This trust. I looked closer. The Whitaker Family Trust. Established nearly 10 years earlier. I vaguely remembered signing paperwork after Dad died. But I had been grieving. I hadn't paid much attention. Robert continued. Most of the controlling ownership in Whitaker Logistics isn't personally yours. I blinked. What? It's protected inside the trust. I looked down again. The numbers were right there. My father had transferred majority control years earlier. Long before Mark's affair. Long before Rachel. Long before any of this. Suddenly pieces started falling into place. Wait, I looked at Robert. You're telling me Mark can't actually get control of the company? Robert smiled. No. The word felt wonderful. No. For the first time in days, I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that escapes before you realize it's coming. Robert laughed too. That's basically my reaction when I figured it out. I shook my head. He spent all this time trying to take something he can't legally touch. Exactly. The image was almost ridiculous. Mark and Rachel building their scheme for over a year. Creating shell companies. Stealing money. Manipulating records. All while chasing ownership they could never obtain. For a brief moment, I actually felt sorry for them. That feeling lasted about 3 seconds. Then I remembered the sedative. The sympathy disappeared. What happens now? Robert's expression became serious again. Now we prove everything. The rest of the morning passed quickly. We reviewed documents, financial records, email chains, corporate filings. By lunchtime, I finally felt something I hadn't felt since waking up in the medical room. Hope. Not certainty, not victory, just hope. Then everything changed. At 2:37 p.m., Robert received a call. I watched his face while he listened. His expression darkened immediately. Understood. He ended the call. What happened? They know. My stomach tightened. Who? Rachel. The hope vanished instantly. What do you mean? One of our investigators was spotted asking questions. I stood. Damn it. Robert nodded. They know someone is looking into them. Can they destroy evidence? They'll try. That afternoon proved him right. By 4 o'clock, several unusual things happened. First, Mark canceled 3 scheduled meetings. Then Rachel requested access to archived financial files. Then an emergency board meeting appeared on everyone's calendar. Monday morning. Corporate headquarters. Mandatory attendance. I already knew what was coming. Still seeing it made my stomach sink. Mark wasn't running anymore. He was accelerating. A few minutes later, my phone rang. Mark, I answered. Hi. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Diane, how are you feeling? I'm okay. Good. A brief pause. Then he delivered the real reason for calling. We've scheduled a board meeting Monday. I saw. I think it might be time to discuss reducing your workload. There it was. Exactly what Robert predicted. Reducing my workload. You've been under a lot of stress. Stress. His favorite word lately. I appreciate your concern. I'm serious. His tone softened. You need to take care of yourself. I nearly laughed. Instead, I thanked him. Then I hung up. The moment the call ended, Robert looked at me. They're going after your position. I know. You ready for that? I wasn't. That was the truth. For years, Whitaker Logistics had been part of my identity. I had helped build it, expanded it, protected it. Now the possibility of losing everything suddenly felt real. Not because Mark deserved it, because bad people sometimes win, at least temporarily. That evening, I sat alone on my back patio. The Indiana summer air felt warm. Children rode bicycles down the street. A sprinkler clicked rhythmically across a neighbor's lawn. Everything looked normal, yet I couldn't stop imagining Monday. The boardroom, the accusations, the humiliation. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if they convinced people I was unstable? What if the company I loved turned against me? For the first time since this began, fear started winning. My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. One sentence. Call me. Now. I immediately pressed dial. He answered. Diane. His voice sounded energized. What happened? We found it. I stood so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. Found what? The footage. My heart pounded. What footage? Security cameras from the charity dinner. I stopped breathing for a moment. Then Robert said the words that changed everything. We have Rachel tampering with your drink. The neighborhood around me suddenly felt silent. No children, no sprinklers, no traffic, nothing. Only those words. We have Rachel tampering with your drink. Monday's board meeting was still coming. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was looking forward to it. I arrived at headquarters before sunrise on Monday. The parking lot was nearly empty. Just a few executive vehicles sat beneath the security lights. For a moment, I stayed inside my car. The building stood quietly in front of me. 3 stories of glass and brick. 20 years of my life lived inside those walls. I had walked through those doors after promotions, after contract wins, after my father's funeral, after some of the happiest and hardest days of my life. Now I was walking in for a completely different reason, to find out whether the truth would finally matter. I grabbed my briefcase and stepped out. The air felt cool. By the time I reached the executive floor, Robert was already waiting. He held a large black portfolio case. The kind lawyers bring when they're carrying enough evidence to ruin somebody's day. You ready? He asked. No. He smiled. Good, honest answer. That actually helped. A little. At 8:55 a.m., board members began arriving. Most of them had known me for years. Some had known my father before me. Others had watched me grow from a young financial analyst into CFO. Yet as they entered the boardroom, I noticed uncertainty in several faces. Rumors travel fast, especially in business. Everyone had heard about my collapse. Everyone knew this emergency meeting was unusual. And everyone knew something was wrong. At exactly 9 a.m., Mark stood, confident, relaxed, perfectly dressed. Rachel sat beside him, professional as always. Her navy blazer matched the one she wore during important client meetings. If I hadn't known better, she could have passed for Employee of the Year. The chairman called the meeting to order. Then Mark began. First, I'd like to express concern for Diane's health. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I sat quietly, listening, watching, waiting. For 15 minutes, Mark carefully built his case. He spoke about stress, workload, exhaustion, recent health concerns. He never directly called me incapable. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the room. His conclusion was simple. Whitaker Logistics needed stable leadership. And perhaps I should temporarily step away. A few board members nodded. Others avoided eye contact. Then Mark sat down. Rachel gave him a small smile. The kind people exchange when they think victory is close. The chairman turned toward me. Diane. I stood. My hands were surprisingly steady. For weeks I had imagined this moment. Now that it had arrived, I felt strangely calm. Thank you. I looked around the room. I agree with Mark about one thing. Several heads lifted. I continued. This company does need stable leadership. Mark's smile widened slightly. Then I added, which is why we're going to discuss the people who have been stealing from it. The smile disappeared. Immediately. The room became very quiet. I opened my folder. Over the last 14 months, more than $800,000 was transferred through multiple shell companies. A few board members exchanged glances. I slid copies of financial records across the table. These records identify the accounts involved. Mark shifted in his chair. Rachel stopped smiling. Good. We were just getting started. For the next 20 minutes, Robert and I presented evidence. Bank transfers, corporate records, email communications, transaction histories. The room grew quieter with every page. One board member removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Another simply stared at the documents. Then Mark stood. This is ridiculous. His voice sounded different now, sharper, less controlled. These accusations are completely unsupported. I looked toward Robert. He nodded. Right on schedule. Actually, Robert said calmly, we have additional support. He connected a laptop to the conference room screen. A video appeared. Security footage. The ballroom from the charity dinner. The timestamp was visible. The room held its breath. Rachel appeared on screen, walking toward a table, looking around, checking to see if anyone was watching, then reaching into her purse. A few seconds later, she poured something into a drink. My drink. Nobody spoke. The footage continued. Rachel quickly stepped away. A moment later, I appeared in the frame. I picked up the glass. The boardroom remained silent. The video ended. Nobody moved. Nobody needed an explanation. Everyone had seen it. Finally, one director broke the silence. My God. Rachel's face had gone completely white. Mark looked like he had stopped breathing. I wasn't finished. Not even close. Robert stood. There's one more issue. He distributed another stack of documents. Trust agreements. Ownership records. Legal filings. I knew what was coming. Mark didn't. Robert looked directly at him. You've spent considerable effort attempting to gain control of Whitaker Logistics. Mark said nothing. Unfortunately for you, the controlling ownership is protected inside the Whitaker family trust. Confusion crossed his face, then disbelief, then panic. No, Robert nodded. Yes. The room watched, fascinated. Mark grabbed the documents, flipped through pages, read faster, then faster. His expression became almost comical, because for the first time he realized the truth. Everything he had worked toward was impossible. One of the older board members leaned back in his chair. A retired trucking executive named Frank, 72 years old, never known for filtering his thoughts. He shook his head. Then he said, So you've spent a year trying to rob a vault you don't even own. For a second, nobody reacted. Then somebody laughed. A quiet laugh. Then another. Even the chairman struggled to hide a smile. The tension broke instantly. Mark looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Rachel wasn't doing much better. Then something even more satisfying happened. They turned on each other. Completely. Immediately. This was your idea, Mark snapped. Rachel stared at him. My idea? You handled the transfers. You approved them. You told me. No, you told me. Back and forth. Louder. More desperate. The board watched in disbelief. 16 years of marriage had taught me many things. One of them was this. People show you who they really are when they're losing. And neither of them looked impressive. Finally, the chairman slammed his hand against the table. Enough. Silence. At last. The vote happened quickly. Unanimous. Mark was terminated. Rachel was terminated. Both effective immediately. Security would escort them from the building. As they gathered their belongings, neither looked at me. I wasn't sure whether they felt shame, or anger, or fear. Maybe all three? Then, just as they reached the door, another surprise arrived. 2 investigators entered the boardroom. One carried a badge. The other carried a folder. The room fell silent again. The lead investigator looked around. We'd like to speak with Mark Harrison and Rachel Bennett. Nobody said a word. Nobody needed to. The investigators had already found them. And suddenly being fired looked like the least of their problems. 3 months later, I found myself standing in line at a small coffee shop in Carmel. Nothing glamorous. Just a neighborhood place with mismatched tables, good cinnamon rolls, and regular customers who knew one another by name. The kind of place I used to rush through without noticing. Now I actually had time to enjoy it. Morning, Diane. The barista smiled. The usual, you know it. As she prepared my coffee, I looked out the window. A father was helping his granddaughter carry a box of donuts. 2 retirees sat on the patio discussing golf. Life looked wonderfully ordinary. For the first time in a very long time, ordinary felt like a gift. A lot had happened since the board meeting. Some of it good, some of it painful, none of it easy. The criminal investigation moved quickly. Once authorities started digging through financial records, things unraveled faster than anyone expected. Mark and Rachel had been careful, just not careful enough. The shell companies, the hidden transfers, the forged approvals, the false expense reports. Eventually, the evidence became impossible to explain away. Rachel agreed to cooperate. Apparently, self-preservation finally outweighed loyalty. She provided emails, text messages, and financial records investigators hadn't even discovered yet. The decision helped her situation somewhat. Not much, but somewhat. As for Mark, he spent most of his time blaming everyone except himself. his attorney, Rachel, the investigators, the board, me, anyone willing to stand still long enough to listen. The one person he never blamed was the man staring back from his own bathroom mirror. That probably explained a lot. The divorce moved forward separately. That process turned out to be harder than I expected. Not because I wanted him back. I didn't. Not even for a second. The difficult part was accepting that the marriage I remembered wasn't entirely real. Some of the memories were genuine. I know they were. The first apartment. Road trips through Tennessee. Long evenings sitting on our porch talking about the future. Those moments happened, but somewhere along the way the person beside me changed. Or maybe I simply stopped seeing him clearly. That realization hurt more than I expected. One afternoon, Robert and I met for lunch downtown. The same steakhouse we'd used for business meetings for years. As we reviewed final paperwork, he leaned back and smiled. "You know something? What? I was worried about you." I laughed. "Only you?" "No." He pointed his fork at me. "A lot of people were." That surprised me. It shouldn't have. But it did. For so long I'd been focused on betrayal that I'd overlooked something important. The people who actually cared about me never left. Friends checked in constantly. Coworkers offered support. Neighbors stopped by. Even board members called simply to ask how I was doing. One crisis had revealed two completely different groups of people. The ones who used me, and the ones who valued me. That lesson alone was worth remembering. Back at Whitaker Logistics, things slowly stabilized. The board appointed an interim operations team while we reorganized leadership. The process wasn't glamorous. It involved endless meetings, audits, and policy reviews. Real life rarely looks dramatic from the inside. Mostly it looks like paperwork. Lots of paperwork. Still, every small improvement felt meaningful. Employees who had spent months worrying about rumors could finally focus on work again. Customers regained confidence. Projects moved forward. The company survived. That mattered to me more than any personal victory. A few weeks later, I drove to Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis. The sky was clear. The air carried that early autumn chill Indiana gets every year. I brought fresh flowers. Dad always liked simple things. No elaborate arrangements. No unnecessary fuss. I stood quietly beside his grave. For several minutes I said nothing. Then I smiled. You were right. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. I looked down at the flowers. You always said numbers don't lie. I laughed softly. And people do. The strange thing about grief is that it never completely disappears. It changes shape, becomes quieter, less sharp. Standing there, I realized I missed my father more than ever. Not because I needed him to rescue me, because he would have understood. He would have seen through Mark long before I did. And then he would have found a way to tell me without saying, "I told you so." That was one of his gifts. On the drive home, I thought about the sentence that started everything. The sentence I'd overheard through that half-open door. "By tomorrow morning, everything will be ours." At the time, those words terrified me. Now they almost made me laugh. Because tomorrow morning arrived. And nothing happened the way Mark expected. The company wasn't his. The money wasn't his. The future wasn't his. Instead, he lost nearly everything he spent years trying to take. The irony was almost unbelievable. But life occasionally writes its own punchlines. A few months after the divorce became final, I made one final change. I sold the lake house. Not because I needed the money. Because I wanted a fresh start. Too many memories lived there. Some good. Some painful. I was ready for something new. The following spring, I bought a smaller home with a wraparound porch and a backyard full of maple trees. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful. One Saturday morning, while drinking coffee on that porch, I realized something. The best part of revenge wasn't watching someone else fall. It was refusing to fall with them. For a while, I thought justice meant winning. Now I understood something different. Justice meant protecting what mattered, telling the truth, and continuing forward without letting bitterness become your identity. That lesson took me 42 years to learn, but I'm grateful I learned it. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that warning signs rarely appear all at once. They arrive quietly, one at a time. Trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. And if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal, know that you're stronger than you think. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope you'll join me again for another story.